Oh God, welcome to Pizza Cult Books, where business gets worse and worse. I can't remember what our slogan is, our actual tagline, but whatever. I'm just dropping truth for today. That's all I got for you. We had our worst quarter ever, by which I mean someone paid us in change, including a quarter. They brought in this big thing of change, and I found out far too late that it was infested with bed bugs. And so that's definitely our worst quarter we've ever had, both financially and, in terms of me being covered in bugs in the night that are eating my blood. People ask me if I feel like it was a good decision to open a brick and mortar bookstore in 2022 or 2023, or I don't even know when we open anymore. Does it matter? No, none of this matters. In a last-ditch attempt to move some books, I've got some books to tell you about today, priced very unfairly, because somebody's got to pay the rent here, and it's not going to be me, so maybe it'll be you. I did come up with some marketing ideas, and the first one is that we need a mascot. Okay, and what I did on that front, so I was watching March Madness. There's no maybe. Little loaded, a lot loaded. Watching my brackets fall apart. That was my last plan to make up this financial deficit, was make a bunch of money on brackets. This involved me learning what brackets are and how basketball, the rules work. I decided to pick my brackets based on the closest location, whichever city had the closest tour stop for the band Ghost. And so, Papa, into your hands, I commend my brackets. This turned out to not be a great choice. I don't blame Ghost for this because, this is totally unrelated. But, if the band Ghost is doing really well financially and wanted to compensate me in some way, I wouldn't say no to that. But as I'm watching this March Madness, as I'm delving deep into a madness of my own, I noticed that, all these teams have a mascot. Some kind of bird of prey, some kind of like turtle man, abomination of nature, some kind of like Trojan guy with, a skirt made out of a bunch of belts or something. And I thought, why not us? Why can't we have a mascot at Pizza Cult Books? I mean, there are lots of reasons. Most of the time I spent on this, I came up with reasons that this was a bad idea. But then I just decided to go ahead and do it anyway, because if I didn't do something because it was a bad idea, we wouldn't even be here having this discussion in the first place. So it's without further ado that I introduce you to our mascot, Pete the Bedbug. Now, at first you might be saying, oh, I'm just going to name him Pete after yourself. Yeah, I am. I am, I will. And, in some kind of time loop situation, I'll do it again. Because nobody's helping me with this. Nobody is But also, I worked on this mascot. Now, I did try to, cute him up a little bit, because I did notice some mascots, if you're like a wildcat mascot, you don't have like a wildcat with blood all over its face. You see that cheetah and its face is covered in gore. They don't usually go that hard, right? So I tried to cute him up a little bit, but it doesn't really work in the bug world. It kind of just makes it worse, to be honest with you. Also, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, so that could be part of this as well. That could always be part of this. And I knew it had to be some kind of animal, because you cannot have a type of guy anymore. That is not going to work. Some of the race stuff, the existence of race kind of messes that up a little bit. So we didn't want to get into that. So this is a bed bug of indeterminate national origin, an indeterminate culture, other than living in my furniture, my couch, my bed, and creating just little pinprick dots all over me in the night. But in a lot of ways, bedbug is a fitting mascot for us. You know, you think about a bedbug. Disgusting, not something you want around, you know, does cause you some disturbance in the night, but ultimately harmless, right? It's not going to cause you any actual harm other than, you know, the psychological. Pete's occult books, not really something you want around. Thinking about it in the night is not good, not healthy, not productive, not wise. And, you know, disgusting. So, you know, look forward to seeing Pete the Bedbug on lots of great merch that I don't know how I'm going to pay for. If you ever come by and the door is locked and the lights are off and it's 2 p.m. on a weekday and there's someone banging on the door saying, you know, I owe him a bunch of t-shirt money or something, he's 100% right. I appreciate you keeping the secret that I'm inside the store while this is happening, but he is totally in the right. So let's get to some books. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, the novelization by Jeff Strand. So here's what happened. This movie comes out like 30, 40 years ago, and then Jeff Strand makes a somewhat joking tweet about like, when am I going to be tapped to write the novelization for Attack of the Killer Tomatoes? Whoever had the rights to it, or I guess the publisher, Encyclopocalypse Press, was like, hey, if you're serious about this, I think we could wrangle it. And, you know, cut to a little bit later, a joking tweet ends up with an actual meeting with like real people, and, you know, here it is, it happened. This book is incredible. I recommend highly reading this book. However, I recommend reading it like maybe November this year. The reason being, it's going to be the best thing you read this year. And you want to have the best thing you read this year be closer to the end. I peaked early. I made a mistake. Another mistake. What's great about this is it has all kinds of different jokes. It has jokes that like are within the context of the movie. It has jokes that are like just breaking the fourth wall. It has jokes about like, ooh, it was the times, you know, these were words and phrases we said at this time. You know, there's a running joke in the book about there's a female reporter and her boss keeps telling her to kind of use her feminine wiles to get this story. And after drilling it into his head like 100 times, he finally comes around and is like, wait a minute, you're like an actual journalist? And she's like, yeah. And the boss is like, so you can like use journalism skills to get this story? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, all right, you know what? Why don't we try that? That could work. This is so joke dense. It's like early Simpsons, you know, where you're like, I don't want to laugh too much because I'm going to miss the next joke. But I guess that doesn't really apply to reading. I could continue to read and laugh, probably. I don't know, I'm not super smart. Jedi Summer by John Boden. I thought this was like a horror novel, like a creepy book. But it's kind of more of just a coming of age thing about some kids in the summer of 1983. Very good. It's like very close to the heart, it feels. Unfortunately, this book, so it was put out by Silver Shamrock Publishing. I don't know exactly what happened with them, but they had some kind of scandal and I believe no longer exist. I think they turned the rights of their books over to the authors, so this might now be available in some other format or something. I'm not totally sure. And I'm not really, you know, I'm sorry. Maybe Silver Shamrock is horrible. I have no idea. I don't really keep up with this stuff. You know, it's kind of like, how much scandal can you keep up with on Twitter? Do you know what I mean? You're in the author circle on Twitter and it's like, oh my God, can you believe what this lit mag is doing? And I'm like, kind of, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe if we didn't live in a world where it was like 2 of our presidents have been arrested and one of them was like, I don't know, some guy who was speeding too fast in a horse-drawn carriage. Maybe if we didn't live in a world with that kind of stuff going on, you know, the literary world scandals would be more meaningful to me, but I just don't care. But anyway, it's unfortunate that books like this get caught up in stuff like that. I also like to recommend indie books. This is a good indie book. This is kind of an indie memoirish book that I think I don't know, if you're a fan of sort of quaint, quieter memoir type things, this is a great one. And it doesn't overstay its welcome, which I think is a sin perpetrated by a lot of these kind of books. High and Dry by S.M. Park. This is a book that kind of chronicles a life of horrific substance abuse. Substance use that turns into substance abuse. I don't know. The guy is strange. You know, he lived in apartments where basically it was just like, I picture it as a carpet of cans, you know, like 2 feet deep. Beer cans, liquor bottles, stuff like that, you know, and he seems like he was kind of a nightmare to live with and to know, and seems to know that he's a nightmare to live with and to have known. It's hard for me to describe because when I start talking about this book, it sounds like, you know, I don't know, Tucker Max. Like maybe an older hippie version of Tucker Max or something, but it's not. It's like the writing is really good. It's really compelling. It's interesting, and he has a way of writing about his past substance abuse and just utter insanity that is like, the stories are interesting, but it doesn't feel like he's like proud of it. And it's not too hard on himself either. You know, I don't feel like I'm sitting in an AA meeting when I read this, but I also don't feel like I'm sitting in the kind of AA meeting where it's like, I know this guy is saying that he regrets his past, but I don't know. He seems to take an awful lot of pleasure in telling these stories of glory days. I don't know if that's how that song goes, actually. I just went for it. Luigi, a number one. Why Luigi is the best thing to ever happen to this godforsaken planet that we live on. This is just a book of Luigi memes. This could probably also be called Copyright Violation the Book, and just sort of be on hand as an example of like, well, I guess technically you can get away with this for a time, but I have a feeling that with the Mario movie being out, maybe this is not on the store anymore. I'm not totally sure. But I'm going to be honest with you. This is one of the first books I've ever purchased that I was just like, surely it cannot be just a book of Luigi memes. It is just a book of Luigi memes. Soul Collector by Duvay Knox. This is about, you know, I'll read the subtitle, but I'm going to have to put a beep in here. The life and death as told by that death. So, Duvay Knox, let's talk about him for a second. He wrote this book. It's about a guy who dies, and he basically becomes the new Grim Reaper, right? And so he's collecting souls, people who are dead, all that stuff. Duvay Knox is, in my opinion, one of two things. So Duvay Knox kind of presents as a streetwise, how do you put this? I'm gonna just read a little bit of this to you so you know kind of how this is written. But I kept listening, Lissening. Nosa, Nossuh. I won't and can't. WONT, no apostrophe, KANT, can't. You know, stuff like that. There's a lot of that in here. Now, this isn't obnoxious. I actually found it fine. Like, it's surprisingly easy to read, even though everything is written in that way. So if you're a strunken white adherent and anything that deviates from that makes you extremely unhappy, this book will make you extremely unhappy. But I want to say this wasn't like, when I tried to read Everything is Illuminated, I found the sort of like written phonetically language, or, you know, the way it was written was hard for me to follow and wasn't pleasant. I couldn't get into it. This I got into. It flows. I don't know how it works. This is not exactly how I speak in my normal life, but it was fine. It works. So this is what makes me suspicious about Duvay Knox, because Duvay Knox presents as very like rough around the edges, a street poet perhaps, you know, doing things his way, telling stories the way he knows how to tell stories. And you know, he's kind of like, if I had to categorize his author persona in film terms, he is like blaxploitation come to life, right? He's like a Rudy Ray Moore come to life. Well, I guess Rudy Ray Moore was alive. And that might be who Duvay Knox really is. I'm suspicious. I don't know if I'm suspicious. I think what I want the reality to be, I want Duvay Knox to be like a professor of English at some Ivy League institution. He works at Dartmouth, you know, and he teaches English class and whatever. And the beauty of it is Soul Collector or his other book, The Pussy Detective, just don't cross over with that. So somehow nobody in the MFA department knows that that's what he's doing on the side. The reason I sort of have came across that way of thinking was like, the way it's written, you'd have to write it so carefully to make it work, even though the words are spelled a different way than we're used to and sort of spelled the way they're pronounced, and the syntax is all different, all kinds of stuff. To make that work is like a feat. It is not easy to do. So it does make me think that, but part of me too just thinks it's wishful thinking, because I just think that would be awesome. If he was, you know, this literary darling on one side, and then on this side he's doing this, that would be perfect. But regardless of who Duvay Knox is, Soul Collector's a good read. I recommend it. Work by Bud Smith. Bud Smith is cool. He's just a cool guy. He works construction and he writes books. And he types out a lot of his books just basically on his phone while he's like in the cab of heavy machinery or something, or on a lunch break. You know, you get little snatches of time here and there, and he writes books in those snatches of time. And this is kind of about that process and that life. It's like that perfect mix of like, hey, you know, making art, making stuff isn't just for fancy people who, you know, have Duvay Knox as a secret professor who goes by some other name at Dartmouth, right? It can be for everybody. And it doesn't have to be the only thing you do. It doesn't have to be your primary moneymaker. It can still be something fulfilling and really fun for you. I do have a little tip. If you're like a high school janitor, little tip for you. Here's what you want to do. You want to crank out like 10 pretty decent, gritty short stories. Because what happens is on the literary scene, people love the, you know, the high school janitor turned literary darling like, Tom Jones? Or they like the Donald Ray Pollock, who worked in a paper mill in Ohio, you know, and then wrote this very gritty couple of books, right? They love that. So if you're in that position and you've got just any little snatch of time in your life, crank out like 10 short stories and, you know, make sure that everybody knows what your lifestyle is like. You're going to be snapped up into that like literary echelon in no time. You'll make some money. It'll be great. This is Fantasticland by Mike Bockoven. This is basically about a Disney World where there's a hurricane and it gets cut off from the rest of the world. It's like in probably Florida, right? The whole place is a disaster area, including everything around it. So Fantasticland has supplies and stuff to last out the storm, and some of the staff stays there. It's intended by the, you know, the executives, because they're like, well, we can have some people stay there. It's very safe. We've got a bunker. We've got food. We've got everything they need. And that way people won't like loot the park. And so they stay there, and it pretty quickly devolves into a Lord of the Flies situation. I also wanted to talk about this book because I did a thing with it where I read a book in a day. So I started this on a Saturday morning and finished it on a Saturday evening, and just basically read straight through and did nothing but read the entire day. I love it. It's a fun way to read something. It's a fun way to, if you've been like struggling to find time to read or something, I think it's a good way to kind of kickstart that reading habit again. Apeshit by Carlton Mellick III. I'm a big CM3 fan. I think this is his slasher. If he was doing a Cabin in the Woods, Friday the 13th kind of thing, this is his entry into that genre. So he's a big Bizarro guy. I would say he's the Bizarro guy. He kind of defined the genre and is one of the few people who's continuing to have a lot of output in the genre. It's super gross. It's super gory. It's, you know, bloody as all get out. I'm 1,000 years old. It's just a great read. And something I really like about Carlton Mellick III is at some point he was talking about how, you know, he likes to write a book that you can get through in about the time it takes to watch a movie. You know, like, why when you pick up a book does it have to be a 10-hour commitment or, you know, a 7-hour commitment? How about we give people something that you could pick up today and finish today, or, finish in a few sessions over a few lunch breaks. It's not like you have to commit your life to this new lifestyle of this book in order to get through it, right? You can finish a book in a few hours. I just appreciate his commitment to moving things along. There really aren't a lot of dull spots in his books. There aren't a lot of scenes that happen where you're like, nothing happened in that scene. It's always clipping along, clicking along, and grossing you out. All right, we got Smashed, or Smash, Squash, Splattered, Chewed, Chunked, and Spewed by Lance Carbuncle. This is kind of Bizarro adjacent. In Pete's Occult books, we'd shelve this in the Bizarro section. Probably. I guess our literary fiction section is kind of our Bizarro, so this might go in there. It's a road trip book. It's about a guy road tripping across the country to get back to his old, decrepit basset hound, Idjit Galoot. He makes a stop at south of the border. He ends up being mistaken for a corpse at the sort of, FBI training corpse yard where they just let bodies rot, in different ways so they can train people to medically examine them and stuff. And, by that point in the book, he's in such good shape that they think he's actually dead. It's a classic road trip book. Who doesn't like a road trip? Even in Great Gatsby, there's a road trip, so, pick this one up. I recommend it. It's kind of an underrated entry into that Bizarro, but it's kind of Bizarro adjacent too. So maybe if you're like, I don't know, I'd like to dip a toe into the Bizarro world, but the menstruating mall is a little too much for me. This one kind of takes place in the real world. It's just the weirdest sections of the real world. I've got for you A Movie Making Nerd by James Rolfe. So James Rolfe is also known as the Angry Video Game Nerd. If you're into what he does online, you should read this book. And that's, my biggest compliment about this book is I think this is going to be a book that a lot of people who like James Rolfe will read this year. And I'm always a fan of a book that brings people to books who probably wouldn't read otherwise. I think there are going to be a lot of people who love what he does online, who don't typically read a lot, and are going to pick this one up. So I think that's automatically kind of puts it pretty high in my esteem. It's a pretty interesting book. I mean, it is a memoir. It's about his life, and probably the Angry Video Game Nerd portion is the lightest portion, which I think is smart because, his fans are going to know all this stuff already. If you've followed him online, you know a lot about that stuff. Whereas you probably don't know as much about his younger days, his high school years, his college years especially. And then there was quite a bit about making the Angry Video Game Nerd movie. For example, there was some really good advice to do if you do crowdfunding. You want the crowdfunding to end so you get the money as close to the beginning of the year as you can. The reason being, you get charged taxes on that money, right? So if you have a year to spend the money, you can probably write some of it off as expenses for the business, especially if you're doing something like crowdfunding $250,000 for a movie. Unfortunately, having never done anything like that, and because crowdfunding was sort of new at the time, he got $250,000, but he immediately had to give a third of it up because I think their fundraiser ended 2 or 3 weeks before the end of the year. So they had no opportunity to spend it and write it off, but they had to get right into it. There's a lot of stuff like that in this book, and I do kind of put it in that realm of Robert Rodriguez' Rebel Without a Crew, or Lloyd Kaufman's Make Your Own Damn Movie, or even maybe a Joe Bob Briggs book. It's for people who like movies and like making movies and kind of like making independent movies, no budget movies, stuff like that. I have read a few reviews online of people saying oh, this book needed a better editor and whatever. And to be honest, fuck off. There are a couple words in place of other words that spell catch misses? Yes. Are there a couple awkward phrasings in the book? Yes. But I mean, this is not the book by an MFA. This is not Cormac McCarthy's pair of new novels. This isn't the third in that trilogy. You know what I mean? This is a book, a memoir by a filmmaker. And, it's something he made himself. It's something that, he wrote himself and I think edited with a very, very small team. And it's fine. It's not like the way some people would make it out to be. There are a lot of people online who look at an indie book, it's got a couple misspellings on it, and they're just, aghast or whatever. I'm not that person. I hope you're not that person too, because that person's boring and that person sucks, and they're just, who cares what they think? I think the other big thing is, like, if you're focused on that, you're missing the big takeaway of this book. And the big takeaway of this book for me is that James Rolfe is a person who likes to entertain people. When he was in film school, he kind of moved away from doing movies that are like, oh, this is like a metaphor of watching the sunspot go across the floor as it comes through the blinds during the day, you know what I mean? And it's in real time because that makes you blah, 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 blah. And he would make like horror movies or, action movies, things like that. Things that were interesting, but that were crowd pleasing, that entertained people. And I think that's what he's done with his book too, is he wrote a book to entertain people. And it is entertaining. And that's the kind of person I prefer. A filmmaker whose goal is to be entertaining over being like super artistic. A writer whose goal is to be entertaining over the goal of being like, ooh, I'm going to make sure and not put a preposition at the end of a sentence. I'll take the entertaining person any day. James Rolfe's entertaining. What can I say? That's it. That's all the books I've got for you today. Please, God, buy these. Available, not wherever good books are sold, but like an uncomfortably long cab ride from there. I mean, like, if you get in a cab where good books are sold and get here, there's really not like cab service here. We're kind of rural in that way. But distance is really a feeling, right? It's not really about the actual mileage. You can't express distance in miles. You express distance in how far it feels. Spiritual.